The Right Church, From a Seeker to a Finder. Written by Peter Hoover of Ontario, Canada in the late 1970s. Published in 2021 by Metamorphose Publishing of Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, USA. Chapter 8 of 16. Neither Paul nor Apollos. Hello, is that Debbie? I heard Mom talking on the phone before continuing the Saturday cleaning after breakfast. Yes, same to you, I heard her continue. We just thought it is about time to let you know that we plan on having the family in for Christmas. Grandpa will come as well. No, we were just at home. In fact, I wasn't aware of it that there are any meetings at the Prince of Peace Church this week. I felt my pulse quickening and my cheeks burned. Hastily, I got up to prepare for chores. Is that right? Mom now exclaimed, and I knew by the tone of her voice that Debbie had talked about me attending there last night. No doubt she was innocent, for I didn't think she knew of Dad's ideas on going to revival meetings, yet at any rate the cat was now out of the bag. I heard the phone click into place, and Mom appeared from the hallway, a grim expression on her face. On the way out over the porch, I met Dad rushing in from the mailbox, breathless. A letter from Uncle Joe, he announced, flourishing an envelope before my face as he hurried on inside. Uncle Joe only wrote once a year or so. He was Dad's uncle, in fact, and a brother to Grandpa Stoner. He lived in the Waterloo area further north, but years ago he had farmed the McAllister farm across the road from ours, and long before my time he had taken his family to Waterloo, where they belonged to another old order Mennonite group, one that continued to use horses and buggies to get around. A full hour passed before Dad appeared in the barn, and I wondered whether Mom had already told him what she had found out about me. Thankfully, he gave no hint in that direction, as he told me all about his sudden plans to go on a trip, today. Uncle Joe has turned sick, he began, cancer of the liver, and he'll be going to the hospital on Monday. I'm afraid this may well be our last chance to see him, so we'll be leaving in another 30 minutes. I stared at him incredulously. What about the chores? I managed to ask. Do everything that's really necessary this morning, and leave the rest to Jock. Uncle Dan or one of his boys could come to make sure everything's under control. I'll explain to Jock which cows we're milking now, and I think he'll do okay. He's great with following exact instructions. I agreed with that. I figured he must have learned that at the monastery. But Dad was something else. He could be optimistic and positive to a fault, always expecting that everything would just work out. Yet, oh well. I also agreed with him that it was probably our duty to go. I had always liked to visit the Waterloo area, and special outings like this did not fall on our laps too many times. Turning from the Salem Line interchange onto the Queen Elizabeth Way, we noticed immediately the absence of this four-lane highway's usually intense traffic. Just the right time of day to travel, Dad glanced at the clock on the dash. But tonight we'll probably get into rush hour traffic, thick and fast. We should get to Uncle Joe's place in about another hour and a half. The low-lying fields lay covered with a gleaming blanket of newly fallen snow, and the forest had become a frosty wonderland etched against the clear blue sky. See that tiny wooden silo? Nellie asked. We had both liked to compare farms and greatly enjoyed the constant changing scenery from our vantage point on the back seat. And look at that split-rail fence, added Bertha. Nothing must have changed on that farm since pioneer days. The Queensway merrily skirted the edges of towns along the lake, and we soon found ourselves on the high span of the Burlington Bay Bridge, looking down at the smoking steel mills of Hamilton and the Great Lakes freighters anchored in the bay for the winter. Finally, after changing roads several times, the twin cities of Kitchener and Waterloo surrounded us, and we knew that we had reached the heart of the Waterloo region Mennonite settlement. At the far end of the city, Dad stopped in at the sprawling stockyards and farmers' market complex, where we all got out to look around. On both sides of a broad central aisle, vendors sold farm produce, meats, second-hand clothing, fake jewelry, and almost anything else imaginable, from books and lawn ornaments to citrus fruits and velvet paintings. Some of the vendors, as well as a sizable number of shoppers, wore plain clothes, but here I quickly realized it would have been impossible to tell just who belonged to which type of old order group, Mennonite, Amish, or Tunker, So many different types and styles, all of them representing some kind of church standard or religious rule. I wondered what God actually thought of it. So many ways of being right. Inside the building, the acrid smell of hundreds of bawling cattle greeted us, while the auctioneer rattled off a steady stream of prices for different lots of Hereford or Angus or Holstein cattle, moving constantly through the ring. On a raised catwalk over the pens, we looked down to see the men working amongst the herds. I enjoyed it, but Mom and the girls soon tired of it. "Let's get out of here quick," Mom said, waving her hand over her nose, "before we stink like steers for the rest of the day." "Absolutely," Bertha agreed with feeling. I noticed she had her Sunday head covering on, for the one she usually wore during the week did not have strings. An hour later, we found ourselves sitting in the quiet little kitchen of Uncle Joe's retirement house. Aunt Rachel had died the year before, so only their unmarried daughter, Keturah, remained to take care of her elderly father. As long as I could remember, we always enjoyed our family visits to Uncle Joe's home. This time was no exception. I enjoyed afresh the quiet antiquity of his retirement house with its kerosene lamps, the grandfather clock ticking in the corner, the Victorian dishes in the china cabinet with rows upon rows of venerable books, some of them with German titles. This, with Keturah's navy dress that swished around her ankles, and the black kerchief she tied so tightly under her chin. Uncle Joe sat in a rocker by the stove, his snowy white hair resembling Grandpa's, as he talked on and on about Dorchester. He wanted to know all about Uncle Dan's family, how Grandpa was doing in the care home, what was going on with the churches, and what was happening in the community he had grown up in and knew so well. I wondered why he did not come down to see us more often, if he missed us that much. Outside the window, I saw a buggy with a horse tied to a hitching post, and my question was answered. One of Dad's cousins, Nelson Stoner, owned the farm where Uncle Joe lived. He operated a sawmill down behind the barn. After a while, I noticed a team of horses and a sleigh come clattering in the lane. The driver looked cold, with his cap scrunched down almost over his eyes. At first, I failed to register what I saw. A fat cigar protruded from his mouth behind his raised overcoat collars. A puff of smoke drifted out from the man's face to mingle with the frosty breath of the horses. I glanced at Nellie to see if she noticed it too. We stayed at Uncle Joe's place for the noon meal. Then we returned to the Twin Cities and on to Hamilton, where Mom had wanted to do some shopping, particularly at the Barton Street Mall. Dad left us there and drove off on business of his own, while we scattered, making the most of our time until 6:30, the time we had appointed to meet the car to drive on home. Not a problem, except for me. Just before I left the bookshop in the mall, a family coming in the door caught my attention. A young man carrying a little boy on his shoulders, a girl clinging to his hand, and a woman with another child on a baby carrier fastened on her front. The young man made eye contact with me and smiled. I felt embarrassed. Had he noticed me staring? I hoped not, but then coming my direction, he greeted me. "Hi, do you work here?" "No," I quickly responded, "but I saw an employee just disappearing into the mezzanine." "Do you know if this place has a Christian book department?" he continued. "We're looking for decent things for our children." "Oh, sure," I gladly pointed to the section along the steps. "I just came from there." "Ah, so that must mean you're also a Christian." "I am," I said, but a wave of apprehension struck me. What would he ask next? "Do you love the Lord?" Somehow his question did not strike me as rude or invasive. Yet I looked at my shoes. What should a person say? "The very fact that you came from the Christian book rack made me curious, I guess," he explained, "but I also find it encouraging to find a young man in that section of the store. Unfortunately, there is far too much of the other kind available." I acknowledged that, and somewhat lamely said, "Yes, we belong to a Christian church." The lady with the children had found their way back to the books in question. I knew it was time for me to go. Yet, almost hesitantly, I asked, "Are you a Christian?" A stupid thing to say, I realized at once, but the man did not seem disturbed. "I deeply appreciate what the Lord Jesus did for me," he told me. "I use his blessed name, but not lightly. I was not a nice young man, but everything has turned around. You see the young lady that came with me and these 3 little ones? I am delighted to tell you that she is my wife. We got married last week." Now it was my turn to wonder. Right away, when I first saw them, I had wondered what kind of hippies they might have been. The man had lots of hair, but not way too much. The lady with a bandana and ponytail wore ample skirts that looked like they might have been made of several pairs of jeans. Plain people, after a fashion, but certainly not Mennonite or Amish or Tunker. "How's that?" I asked the man. His unusual statement seemed warranted, and he gladly explained, almost as if he had expected it. "We did not know Christ," he told me. "We lived wild, with others, but the Lord pursued us. He snatched us from our misery. Then, better yet, He led us into a Christian community where all of us are finding our way with Him, together. Have you also learned how to walk with Him?" The young man's earnest demeanor took me aback. I had not met anyone quite like this before, and somehow I liked it. Probably noticing my slight hesitation in answering, he continued, "I get together with other Christians right here in the city, usually up the escarpment where we often meet. It's just a house church, people like us who have found the Lord and love to worship Him together. We sing a lot, study the Bible, and pray. We also like to eat together, and our children have all become great friends. We play and dance with them a lot." "Any chance you're part of the Ontario Mennonite Conference?" I asked, curious but not worried. I remembered that Enos and Betty Rittenhouse ran their rescue mission right here in Hamilton, and I was sort of friends with their son Eugene, my age. They came from Alan Miller's church. "Nope, we don't belong to Paul, nor Apollos, nor any other split off of anything," the man quickly explained. "We're just followers of Christ. A little bunch of believers trying to keep up with Christ as He leads up the narrow way." After a short reflection, he continued, "If you want to really know who we are, you should actually talk with someone else from our fellowship. The Lord called us a month ago, and we got baptized last week, same day we got married." "Who's your preacher?" I asked. "Anybody shares messages here," he answered, "as long as he's under the direction of Christ and inspired by Him. But don't worry, we get many thought-provoking and challenging sermons all the time. If no one has anything to say, we're just quiet and wait on the Lord until something happens, or else we just read out loud or worship God as the Spirit directs." I felt a bit bad for not having answered the man's question, whether I loved the Lord or not. It came to me so suddenly, and I had not answered such things before. Did I truly love the Lord? Did I know for sure what that meant? He had me thinking hard, but instead of needing to explain myself, the glass door swung open, and my 2 sisters stepped in from the cold, breathless, with one obvious mission, to find me and call me out. Apologetically, I turned to leave. "Are these your sisters?" the man asked, all the more interested. The 3 of us smiled. The obvious stood before him. But before I could answer, he asked, "Are you plain people? I would have never guessed from just looking at you, but now seeing your sisters, you look like the folks one sees in Kitchener or Waterloo." "Yes," I admitted, "we are Old Order Mennonites." "Really? Where's your cool black hat?" I couldn't help but smile. I only put mine on for church meetings. The man laughed. "So you're another law-abiding member of some organization, but not inwardly convinced, right?" Okay, I thought to myself, if he wants to be that personal, I'll ask him something in return. "I noticed your costume," I told him. "Does that represent the group you just got baptized into last week?" The young man laughed. "It's not a costume, friend. We just wear what we have at hand, as long as it fits into our values and what we believe." By this time, his wife and children had returned from the Christian book sector. "Ah, here's my wife, Sibylle. She's from Montreal, but don't worry, she speaks English." Dark-eyed and gentle, I caught her intelligent remarks and realized that even though dressed like a hippie, she probably had an education not to be sniffed at. Intelligence came with inner quietness and grace. "I heard some of your conversation with Bruce," she said, "and I wish to tell you that I do not cover my head for any religious tradition or culture. Instead, I do this as a symbol established by the Holy Spirit among the very earliest Christian believers. What I wear and how I cover my head is nothing other than a small part of an infinitely greater reality, one chip in the mosaic of the universal order of God." My sisters and I needed to go, but the man detained us. "I'm so sorry, I did not even introduce myself. reaching out his hand. "I'm Bruce Schaefer. It's been a pleasure. Any chance we can meet again?" "Not sure," I answered, "but it might help if I had your address." My sisters looked at me strangely. Was I planning to stay in contact? But inwardly glad, I watched Bruce quickly scribble down his contact information on the back of a receipt, holding it over his knee. "Absolutely." When he handed it to me, I caught the gleam of genuine sincerity shining through his eyes. "Hey, if you have the chance, call me." Glancing back, as we scampered across the parking lot, I saw the small family still standing there, looking our way. "Did you get delayed?" Mom asked, more as a reprimand than a question, as all three of us dove into the vehicle and Dad started driving. All the way home, I processed the new information I had gathered at the Barton Street Mall. Paul or Apollos? In which of the groups, or where in the world would I find Christ? In Ontario, Canada, in 1977? One thing I knew. This little house church in Hamilton, whatever it might represent, spoke much louder and clearer to me than any old order or traditional group I had seen all day, no matter how black their cars might have been, or how many horses and buggies they might have owned. What might a non-denominational house church actually be? I did not know for sure, but I decided against asking Dad what he thought of it. Too many things involved already to stir any more into the mix. By this time, the winter evening had long turned to dark, and we spent the rest of our trip in comfortable silence. Bedtime for sure by the time we'd get home, and I wondered how things had gone with Jacques and the cows.